Come, sit down. I want to ask you something. Have you ever sat in a church, hands raised, heart open, giving your offering and trusted completely that the man standing at that pulpit was who he said he was? Most of us have sat in those pews and believed, because we were taught to honor the man of God. We were taught that when he speaks, something holy is present. We were taught to trust. This is the story of what happens when that trust is placed in a man who decided, a long time ago, that his calling was not a responsibility. It was a business. His name was Pastor David, and the church of 400 people who loved him, who gave their tithes, their testimonies, their sick children, their broken marriages. They had no idea who was standing at their altar every Sunday morning. Come, let me tell you. Pastor David had built Lighthouse Assembly in East Legon, Accra, from nothing. 17 years. He started with 40 people in a rented hall with plastic chairs and a borrowed microphone. By the time this story takes place, he had 400 members, a permanent building, a church bus, a weekly television broadcast, and a reputation that stretched across the city. He was magnetic. I will not take that from him. When Pastor David preached, people felt something. He had the kind of voice that made you believe the words were coming from somewhere beyond him. He prayed over the sick. He counseled the broken marriages. He buried the dead and blessed the newborns, and showed up consistently, reliably, for every significant moment in his congregation's lives. His wife Abina stood beside him through all of it. A quiet, dignified woman, a teacher by profession. She ran the children's ministry, organized the women's retreats, ironed his shirts before every Sunday service. She believed in David completely, not blindly, but with the deep earned belief of a woman who had watched her husband build something from nothing over 17 years. She thought she knew him. She did not know him at all. It had started, as these things often do, gradually. The first time Pastor David took money that was not his, he told himself it was temporary. The church had just received a large building fund offering. He needed to cover a personal debt quietly, quickly, before Abina noticed. He would replace it within the month. Nobody would know. He replaced it, and then he did it again and again. And each time it became slightly easier, because the first time is the hardest, and after that a man's conscience begins adjusting to the new temperature. Over 8 years, Pastor David had taken the equivalent of over 300,000 Ghana cedis from the church accounts. Building fund money, tithe money, welfare fund money meant for widows and struggling families in the congregation. He spent it on a second apartment in Tima that Abina knew nothing about, because that is where she lived. Sister Portia, a 30-year-old woman who had joined Lighthouse Assembly 5 years earlier as a new member. Quiet, grateful, completely unaware, she would later say that the man she knew as David was standing at a pulpit every Sunday calling other people to righteousness, to lives again, but this time it was not just a family being deceived, it was 400 people who were giving sacrificially, widows dropping their last cedis into that offering bowl, believing it was going to God. It was going to Tima. Elder Kofi had been at Lighthouse Assembly for 12 years. A retired accountant, precise, methodical, the kind of man who notices when numbers do not sit right. He had been noticing for 2 years. Small things at first, offering counts that did not match deposit records. A building project quoted at one figure but invoiced at another. A welfare disbursement that appeared in the books but could not be accounted for by any of the families who were supposed to have received it. He raised it quietly with Pastor David once. David smiled, explained it away, prayed with him, called him a faithful servant. Kofi went home half satisfied and half not. He kept watching. He kept his own records, quietly, carefully, the way a man keeps records when he suspects something but hopes he is wrong. By the time he had finished, he had 14 months of documented discrepancies. He took them to the church board on a Tuesday evening in October, a plain brown envelope placed on the table without drama. He said only this: I have been praying about this for 2 years. I could not stay silent any longer. I believe we have a problem. I believe it starts at the top, and I believe God is asking us to deal with it honestly, no matter how painful that is. The room was silent for a long time after he finished speaking. Then someone asked, "Are you sure, Kofi?" He said, "I am an accountant. I have been sure for 14 months. I was just hoping I was wrong." The board confronted Pastor David that same week. He denied everything. Then he admitted the financial irregularities but denied the relationship. Then when Elder Kofi produced phone records and an address, he sat down very slowly in his chair and said nothing for a long time. Abina was not in that meeting. She was at home preparing a meal for a church family that had just had a baby. She had cooked jollof rice and brought plantain and was wrapping everything carefully when her phone rang. It was one of the board members, a woman she had known for 10 years. The woman said, "Abina, You need to come to the church, now, and you need to prepare your heart. She said she knew in that moment, before she had been told a single specific thing, that her life was about to divide into before and after. She said her hands kept moving, kept wrapping the food, tying the ribbon on the container, because her body did not know yet what her heart already understood. She drove to the church. She sat in that boardroom and she listened. And when they had finished telling her everything, the money, the apartment, the woman, the 8 years, she nodded slowly, thanked them for telling her, stood up and asked someone to please take the food to the family that had just had a baby, because she had promised she would send it and she did not want the baby's family to go without. That was Abina. Even in the worst moment of her life, her first thought was someone else's newborn child. Pastor David was removed from the pulpit that Sunday. Elder Kofi stood before the congregation and read a statement. He did not dramatize it. He did not editorialize. He read the facts plainly, the way an accountant reads facts, and he asked the congregation to pray. The silence in that building was unlike any silence 400 people had ever shared together. Some members wept. Some were angry, a deep, specific anger that comes from discovering that your generosity was stolen. Some left and never came back. Some stayed and held each other in the car park afterwards because they did not know what else to do. Pastor David moved out of the family home that same week. Abina did not ask him to. He simply left, perhaps because staying required a courage he had never actually had, beneath all the preaching. Sister Portia ended the relationship immediately upon discovering the full truth. She also left the church. She has not been seen since. The money, most of it could not be recovered. The apartment had been sold. The accounts were empty. 300,000 cedis, given by widows and workers and young couples and struggling families who believed they were building something for God, gone. Let me tell you what Pastor David's story teaches us. First, a title does not make a man. Pastor David wore the collar, carried the Bible, spoke the language of holiness every Sunday. But a title is just clothing. Underneath it was a man who had decided very early that his position was an opportunity rather than a responsibility. Watch the fruit, my people. Not the title, not the charisma, not the size of the congregation. The fruit. What does this person's private life produce? How do they treat people who cannot do anything for them? Where does the money go? Second, silence is not loyalty. Elder Kofi waited 2 years. 2 years of watching, praying, hoping he was wrong. Some people will say he should have spoken sooner. Maybe. But when he finally spoke, he spoke with evidence, with humility, and with the courage of a man who understood that protecting an institution from embarrassment is not the same as protecting the people inside it. Real loyalty sometimes looks like the hardest conversation in the room. Third, the people who suffer most in these stories are never the ones who caused them. 400 people, widows, young couples, families who gave sacrificially. They are the ones who lost money they could not afford to lose and trust they may never fully recover. When a leader falls, it is never only the leader who hits the ground. And Abina, who cooked jollof rice for a new baby on the night her world fell apart. I think about her often. She did not cause any of this. She showed up every Sunday, ran the children's ministry, stood beside a man she believed in with everything she had, and she lost 17 years of her life to a version of her husband that was never entirely real. She told someone close to her, months after everything she said, I am not angry at God, I am not angry at the church. I am angry at the years I will not get back. The Sunday mornings I stood beside him and felt proud. I want those mornings back. I cannot have them. So now I have to decide what I do with the mornings I still have left. That is not a broken woman speaking. That is a woman choosing deliberately and painfully to keep living. If you are sitting somewhere right now carrying the weight of someone else's choices, someone you trusted, someone you built something with, someone who stood in a holy place and lied to your face, hear me. Their choices are not your verdict. What they did in the dark does not define what you are capable of in the light. You still have mornings left. Decide what you will do with them. That is Pastor David's story, and Elder Kofi's courage, and Abina's grace. I have told you all of it. If it touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment. Have you ever trusted a spiritual leader and been let down? This is a safe place to speak. Subscribe to Betrayal Patterns. Every week I sit down and tell you a story. Real stories about real choices and what those choices build or quietly, slowly destroy. I will see you next time. Take care of yourselves.